Good morning, everybody. We can get settled this morning. We'll go ahead and get started. Still can't hear.
We're gonna go ahead and
Get started.
If everybody can settle in.
All right. Thank you. We'll start this morning. If we can all join in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, good morning and welcome to the DeKalb County Town Hall meeting. My name is Anton King. I'm with the DeKalb County Economic Development Partnership and also serve as a board member for the DeKalb Chamber Partnership. I'll be your moderator for this event. We are grateful for your participation and commitment to our community. Town halls provide an open forum where residents can voice their concerns, share ideas, and engage with local leaders in meaningful dialogue. Your presence here reflects a shared interest in making DeKalb County a better place for all. Before we begin, I will ask everyone to adhere to a few basic guidelines to ensure a respectful and productive discussion. Decorum at town halls meetings ensures a respectful, orderly, and productive discussion between public officials and constituents. Attendees should engage in civil discourse, Attendees should engage in civil discourse, refraining from interruptions, personal attacks, or disruptive behavior. Speakers must wait their turn, follow time limits, and keep questions or comments relevant to the topics being discussed. The moderator will maintain order, ensuring that all voices are heard and that the discussion remains constructive. Professional language and adherence to established meeting rules foster an environment where differing viewpoints can be expressed and debated respectfully. By upholding these standards, a town hall meeting can effectively serve its purpose as a forum for community engagement and informed dialogue. So again, thank you for attending today. Look forward to what we have this morning. So we'll begin, and I'll start with some brief panel introductions. If you'd like to, your name and who you serve, please.
Well, I'm gonna stay sitting down. It feels awkward to sit in front of all of you, but my name's Senator Tyler Johnson. I represent District 14, which you're all sitting in now, but it goes all the way through Eastern Allen County, all the way up to Hamilton and the Steuben County line. But this is my third session in office, and I sit on the Health Committee, Education Committee, Family and Children's Services, and the Tax and Fiscal Committees in the Senate. And so we've had a lot of good discussions this year, and I'll leave it at that for now.
And I'm Sue Glick, and I share DeKalb County with Senator Johnson. I have the area over around Garrett, Corona, the far western part of the county. I sit on judiciary, criminal law and courts, agriculture, and natural resources. And I'm on Rules Committee by virtue of being the assistant pro tem in the Senate. It's a pleasure to be down here, and I hope that we do get a chance to take some questions. I just came from Steuben County, and Ben was right behind me, Ben Smaltz. He was up there. He also represents a portion of Steuben County. Congressman Stutzman was up there this morning speaking to the Steuben County Republicans. So I know Ben, if he wasn't on the road already, I know he was shortly after me coming out of the building, so I'm sure he's on his way.
Thank you. If you'd like, give you each about 10 minutes to discuss bills that you've been working on and where they stand currently.
Yeah, so I'll start in the healthcare space. As many of you know, I'm an ER doc here in town. So a lot of what I'm asked to work on from a subject matter is healthcare. And so we have a lot of big discussions going on right now. Probably the one that's closest to me and I'm working the hardest on from a personal standpoint is prior authorization reform. Senate Bill 480, we've worked on the last 3 years now to get in a good place. And it has a hearing Tuesday morning in the House Insurance Committee. Prior authorization is when, I mean, you probably all have stories on it, but your doctor says you need a procedure and your insurance says, well, wait, we want to have a yes or no answer on that. If you're involved in healthcare at all, you know how ridiculous the system is and the back and forth from a physician's office or a physical therapy office and the insurer. You call and there's somebody maybe in the United States, maybe not, may have a medical education, probably doesn't actually at this point. And a lot of times it's artificial intelligence going through a database that they just auto deny things that your doctor says is necessary. And it's pretty absurd. And their goal on the insurance side, it appears to just delay payment so that they can invest those dollars and make money off of it. Most of them are publicly traded companies, and the bigger they get, the worse they get on these things. So we're trying to push the market, and even in Medicaid, Medicare, push the envelope there so that we can get you the care you need sooner. And actually, when you look at it, it's kind of common sense. If you get to the medication you need, you have less ER visits, you have less complications long-term. And they use the idea of it being fraud or abuse or waste even, when in reality, they're not making that decision based on that. So the bill we have gets rid of all the headaches that are in prior authorization, makes it a very common sense system, and gets all of those things done in a timely manner, 2 weeks at most to get to a no answer or a yes answer. Those are only the worst cases. We're allowing 48 hours, which everybody thinks is a very quick time frame, but we exclude holidays, weekends, that kind of stuff. So it could be over the weekend, but 48 hours is enough time for most people to make a decision on these things. And then we make the insurers tell us why they're denying. So you have a very specific reason as a physician to come back to them and say, here's what. And if the physician can answer that and give them the information that they say, then it's automatically approved. And so I really sat down 3 years ago and said, what are all the things in prior authorization that we could reform and help patients? And that's what we came up with the bill. As you can imagine, the insurance industry is billions and billions of dollars. And so we hit a lot of headwinds last year, and we've been able to navigate this year. And so this hearing on Tuesday morning is really big, and it'll be the first of its kind legislation in the United States. And so hopefully we can lead on that. And so it's pretty neat. Property tax reform is probably the biggest discussion. And I sit on tax and fiscal. I'm the rookie on that committee. So I stepped in the middle of this 4-year-long discussion on tax reform. And I really take a lot of pride in that they trust me to step in and add some thoughtful discussion and frankly, a little bit of that, the low tax discussion, right? I come from I always tell people I'm a little bit of a reformed libertarian, where you have to justify every tax that we impose on you. And so being a part of those discussions and understanding that property tax in itself is probably the worst tax we have. It's great from the fact that it's pretty stable. And from a government standpoint, we like that. But it's also, it's a tax on unrealized gain on your property. And it's a perpetual tax on us as citizens. So we really are looking to curb the growth of the property tax in a respectful manner. If I had my personal choice, I'd get rid of property tax. If I had the answer to replace it or find a way to make sure that we don't shut down local governments in doing that, I would have proposed that answer. So I've been able to speak to that pretty heavily at this point, and it's in the House right now, and it'll get amended pretty heavily, I think, Monday with new reforms. There was a press conference this week and laid out a lot of that. Now, the amendment is bigger than the bill, which is never a good thing in politics when you have a 300-page amendment. And so I've had the opportunity to read every page of that. The bill itself is a couple hundred pages. So when you get to a bill that size, understanding exactly what we're doing is really important. So our Senate Tax and Fiscal Committee is meeting several times a week, which is not the norm. Normally we meet once a week for other committees and kind of work on things separately. This is a big thing. And so we're meeting several hours a week to go through, talk big picture ideas, and then get into the minutia. And over the next couple of weeks, we'll really pick this apart. And so the other part of the healthcare side is there's a bunch of healthcare cost bills coming out of the House. House Bill 1003 and 1004 tackle healthcare costs. I will say that I like House Bill 1003. I worked on very heavily. I got the scorn of the governor for working on it very heavily this past week, but we need to land it in a spot that's responsible, but it brings transparency to healthcare costs in the lab and diagnostic imaging space. It defines what a hospital is. I don't think most people realize when you walk into a hospital and get a lab or a diagnostic image or an office, sometimes the hospital bills an extra fee on top called a facility fee, which is the large portion of your bill. And so we just want people to know what they're getting and why they're getting it at certain places. DeKalb County, that's part of the reason why costs went up when Parkview took over. Part of it was we couldn't sustain as DeKalb Health before. So I lived through both of those worlds and have a pretty good perspective on what's good and bad in the space. I'm the first to say that healthcare costs are high across Indiana. They're not exorbitantly high like some reports would have you believe, but also defining, what those things are. And so we're trying to look and see what the responsible reform there is. And I've got the bill in pretty good shape, I think, coming out of Health Committee this past week. There's a lot of voices speaking into it on the insurance side. Everybody wants us to stack the deck for them, right? Everybody wants to win. So the hospitals want to win, insurers want to win. And I kind of stood up in the middle of committee this week and just said, let's focus on the patient and how the patient interacts with the system and make sure the patient or the payer, the employers who are paying for the care, understand how things are working and make sure that they get a win in this instead of everybody else. And so House Bill 1004, a more difficult bill. So I will never support price controls or price caps as a legislator. Just never will. And that's what House Bill 1004 does. They're trying to message around that. I've told them that's a non-starter with me. And I don't make all the policy in the Senate side, but I will stand up and speak strongly against price controls because there's no other industry that wants that imposed on them. Whether you're in the steel industry or the tool making industry or your Home Depot, we are not going to walk in and tell you what to charge because the market needs to figure some of those things out. And when you look at the kind of death spiral that price controls put on a market, it's not good for the consumer in the long run. And guess what? We end up with higher costs when you work your way through all the troubles that causes. Now, that bill does define what a nonprofit hospital is, and that is where I started in this whole discussion, and that's where I will support landing. What benefits do they provide to a community? How do they justify being a nonprofit hospital? But what most people don't realize is we cannot, as a state, affect federal nonprofit statute. So we're only affecting a small property tax portion of that nonprofit status, which it's not a lot of, it's a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money in the big picture of things. And so getting them above their state threshold for benefit is not a high lift for most hospitals, but making sure that they're claiming the community benefit that they're actually getting, I think is important. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Senator Johnson.
Thank
Senator
you.
Glick.
I want to thank Dr. Johnson for being there. He has supplied a voice of experience, and as young as he is, and he's one of the younger members of the state Senate, his experience in the healthcare industry is invaluable. His knowledge of what these terms mean is very, very important as they craft this legislation. We all are affected by the healthcare industry and the escalating prices, but we don't understand it. Many of you might, but I don't. I don't come from that area. I'm an attorney by trade, and when you talk about some of the nuances of the terminology that's in the healthcare end of things, we have to rely on the expertise of the industry, of the insurance people. But Tyler's presence has been very, very valuable to the Indiana Senate, and I know to the General Assembly as a whole, because he brings real world experience. He can tell you by looking at the terminology by looking at a bill and explaining, just as he did here, the difference in 1004. That's far above my pay grade. I know that I want to be able to go to a hospital if there's an emergency, a health emergency. I want to make sure the care is available and we don't lose that facility. That's the number one priority with me. And the grayer my hair gets and the older my bones get, the more important that gets to be. But what is very concerning to me, the whole idea of price caps. No, I don't want the expenses to go out of sight like everyone else. But by the same token, as a Republican, philosophically, I have a problem with putting limits on the system to the point where some of those entities will no longer survive if they can't make enough money to pay for skilled care. We know there's shortages of nurses across the board in all areas, from the public health facilities to the hospitals, the private care, the nursing homes, and so on. And so if we start saying you can't charge above this, or we can't charge for value received, what happens to the people along the way who have to be employed in those capacities? And I think to have someone who deals with that on a daily basis and who can interact with the industry on these committees, and also on the budget and tax and fiscal, that's extremely important, to have somebody who speaks the language and interacts well. My area is, as I said before, is more in the ag and natural resources side of things. I have several bills this year that have to do with clean water and some issues in that regard. I've been working with the Farm Bureau and other farm organizations in regard to adding invasive species to the Clean Water Act, so that the Soil and Water Conservation can use clean water funding to not only keep the waters clean and to control some of that filtration and all of that, and soil erosion and such as that, but also that if funds are available, they can use some of those funds for invasive species. We don't think of, some people think, oh, well, you're just talking about pulling weeds on the side of the lake. Well, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about those plants and organisms that get in our water supply that choke off our drainage, that cause problems for the farmers in the field and for their crops. It's a very serious problem as people in agriculture start looking for different crops and different kinds of crops to grow for profit. Sometimes those are good things, sometimes they get away from them, and we don't have any natural predators, let's say, for that. We have to know what we can do and what we have to do to keep them out of our water supply, and also out of the neighboring fields and that sort of thing. We just want to give more tools to the experts so that they can use these things to protect all of us and to protect our water. I've also done a couple of bills this year having to do with power and the utilities. One of the things that we're looking at the state level is alternatives to the common sources of utilities. I know there's been a lot of dispute in all the counties and all the areas about, various forms of generating energy. Everything, and everybody's got an idea. Can we use hydrogen? Can we use nuclear? Can we use water? Can we use soil? Can we use solar? Can we use wind? Can we use coal? There are bills in the legislature this year for small modular nuclear reactors. We've tried very hard to get the Navy down at Crane to maybe install a small modular nuclear reactor. They're in desperate need of additional energy, and lucky for us, the United States Military Academy graduates about 50 to 75 nuclear engineers every year, and they could install a small nuclear reactor at Crane, which is south and west of Bloomington in the Bloomfield area. put it on a 30,000 acre military installation and show people, demonstrate how safe that could be and generate cheap and efficient energy without a threat to the public at large. The wheels of the government grind very, very slowly as they move forward, but they're considering it, and they're working with Purdue University and others about the feasibility of doing that. They have them on ships and have had for 50 years. And they've had very few, if any, serious problems with their small nuclear reactors. We're not saying it's a solution for everyone. And as you know, everyone has an opinion on these things, but we also know that our conventional means of generating electricity and providing power are not always the best solution for every community and every group of people. We need extra tools, we need extra ideas, and we want to do it in an efficient manner, and we want to justify the use of these utilities without wasting our natural resources to do it or impinging on all of our quality of life. And that's what we're working on, is those types of issues where we can resolve them and we can give local government the right to choose what they're going to go or who they're going to go with, how they're going to apply these, which utilities, if you will, are welcome in their community and how they expand their usage. We also are watching the expansion of these big energy users, if you will, like the data centers. They consume a tremendous amount of water when they're located in our area. We have 3 going in along the interstate I-80-90 corridor, the toll road area. 2 are in Elkhart County, one's in the just west of South Bend. That will seriously impact the aquifer up in that area. We want to make sure that when you have a significant water user that's going to withdraw water from the aquifer, from the area, that if that affects any significant water user, such as livestock operations or irrigation systems on farms, that there's an immediate process by which that person that's affected, if their well runs dry, they have to have the ability to call an office or a person and say, I've got to have water. I have to have it immediately, do something. And also have a response time built into the statute to make sure that government responds just as quickly, because if it's livestock on the ground and they don't have water, that's a serious impact. That can put somebody out of business in an immediate situation. So we have a bill in that just passed, and significant water users are those people who draw 100,000 gallons a day. And we have a lot of those. We have 4,700 of them in the state of Indiana. And it also would account for those municipalities that are significant water users, which there are. We want to make sure that they know who to call if suddenly they don't have the amount of water they need to make sure that all of you can turn on the tap and have water available to your families. So we just want to make sure those rules are in place and those officers are in an emergency situation that they can respond quickly and make sure that there's some source of water available. We have a number of those types of bills where there are long-term plans and short-term plans that are going into effect as communities now address these large economic developments that call for different management of utilities, such as transmission lines and water usage, such as that. We have a lot of people in the economic sphere, if you will, that go out, the economic development people who go out and attract multiple industries to Indiana. And we've been very good at that, bringing them here, trying to generate jobs and income for the state of Indiana. But one of the things we have to address is the long-term impact that has on the people who live here and on the people we hope to attract to live here in the future. If they use a significant amount of our natural resources, Do we have alternatives available? Do we have a significant amount of those resources so that all of us will be able to share those resources? And if not, how do we develop those resources so that it is available for all of us? You know, economic development has to be tempered with the idea that quality of life is important to all of us as residents and also people who share the manufacturing sphere, because manufacturing is the backbone of the state of Indiana. And we want to make sure we don't rob Peter to pay Paul. We want to make sure that we do it and our growth is in a uniform manner, or a manner which is addresses the needs of all of us, not just one or two along the way.
Thank you. We'll move on to discuss Senate Bill 1, property tax reforms. This bill aims to reform the state's property tax system, potentially reducing funding for public schools. My question is, what will funding look like for our schools within the next budget? And whoever wants to.
Well,
first, go
I'll
ahead.
say a little bit and defer to Tyler because he's on that committee. But one of the things that came up immediately when the discussions were had during the last campaign, during the election cycle, was the idea of we're going to immediately do away with property taxes. If you're familiar with the property tax system in Indiana, we have taxes for various things. We have used motor fuel taxes, if you will, for infrastructure. That has been structured over a number of years so that the money coming in on your gas tax that you pay at the pump is used primarily for building roads and bridges, maintaining those roads and bridges, making sure that it stays, it's a user fee. We want it to stay where it's being collected and what's being collected for. We have sales taxes that come in, and that goes to pay for a lot of different things. But property taxes are the local taxes, if you will. That pays for things like your schools, your municipalities. It takes care of local government and their needs. It puts the highway trucks on the road, if you will. It makes sure that the school buses run. It helps pay for your schools and your teachers, your building, your wages. And to immediately say we're going to cut that to the bone or we're going to do away with it. What we did not want to see, and this is the Republican majority, I guess you would say, especially, is very concerned about the idea, yes, you can do away with property taxes, but you have to have the money from somewhere. And it doesn't make sense to say we're not going to tax property, but we're going to raise taxes on everywhere else. Then all you're doing for the electorate and for the people of Indiana is they're just reaching into a different pocket to pull out the money to pay for their services. It's only fair if we make it balanced. And right now, because of inflation and the way we collect property taxes, the value of people's property has gone up, which is raised with trending. It's raised the way we assess taxes and we've collected taxes. And for some people, that has been very, very significant when you're not selling a home and the house next door sells for twice or three times what everything else in the neighborhood was valued at right up until now. And all of a sudden, with the inflation has driven it out of sight. We have to get that back into some sort semblance of reality. We don't want to force people out of their homes. We don't want to force people to be severely restricted on where they can live simply because they could afford the house when they moved there, and now it's been priced out of their range. That's what's happening in Indianapolis right now. We're trying to balance things so that the communities and the schools, they do their budgets as early as they start in May and June of the previous year. They start doing budgets through the summer into the fall. They adopt their budgets in late October, early November, before they go into effect the following year. You can't chop them in January and say you have to go back to the amount of money you had 2 years ago or back in 21. You can't do that to them because they're already in that process. They've been into the budget process for 6 months. You have to give them a ramp in which they can start to modify, they can start to change the budgeting process, they can realign their priorities so that they can reach a happy medium, if you will, and still meet the needs and address the debt load that they have. They can address the issues such as inflation that are coming at them. And so that's what's slowing the process, if you will, right now as we go through the budget writing and as we go through the Senate Bill 1 is the idea of giving people an off ramp, giving them a method of addressing the needs of everyone, at the same time cutting the load on the landowners, on the property taxpayers, and bringing it into some kind of balance. If we have to change that load of where those taxes are collected, that's what we're looking at. But keep in mind, there is no quick fix to a program that is balanced. If we take away here, it's like a balloon. It's going to push out over here. So we want to keep it in balance, but we also want to address people across the board so everybody pays their fair share and it doesn't fall on any one given group harder or more harshly than it does anyone else.
Yeah, great explanation. I think I want to start by saying every time somebody talks about property taxes, they make it sound like a very simple thing. I would like to make it a very simple thing. You have a lot of different things playing into why property taxes are a problem right now. And so I know I've actually heard from a few people in this room. And so the first thing I ask is for you to send me your property tax bill so I can understand why yours went up, because everybody's is a little bit different. In our area in Allen County, we have a couple different issues. So I can pick on our own area in northern Allen County. We're in East Allen County schools, and you asked about schools, so I'll get to that. But we have three problems of why property taxes rose so much. The assessed value is a big part of that. When you talk about assessed value and trending, that's what most people see. When you go to sell your house, it's great. But I plan to live in my home for the next 45 years. It doesn't really benefit me at all to have an increased assessed value. It's a negative for that entire time. Don't ever plan on moving, right? And so the fact that in the last 3 years, my property value has almost doubled is not a good thing, right? So it may provide some benefit to somebody else in our community. That's okay. But to me individually, it's not a good thing. But it also has outpaced inflation. So you can't use inflation as a marker. So when those values go up and then you tax on those values. So I'm not even talking just about my assessed value going up, doubling. Everybody will say, oh, that's a good thing. Your base goes up, your bill should go down. Well, guess what? Now our tax bills are doubling. And that's a big issue. And where is that happening? In our area, it's fire districts, and the school is eating up a lot of where that tax base is coming from. And so the schools are going to get picked on a little bit in this process because of that. And so the fire districts are another one that you have to be careful when you give a group or fire districts are a fairly new thing. It's been around for a while, but people haven't used them. So when you have a fire territory or district, that gets really confusing. So they're outside taxing levies. And so if you get them underneath the umbrella, it's probably a little bit better. But when you have an outside entity that can raise their own tax revenue, then it's additive to your tax bill as it is already. And that becomes an issue. And so that's hit us in Allen County a little bit. But we actually had a tax decrease from our county, and that got a rate decrease, and that got ate up by our school almost immediately. And so that's one of the big issues we're trying to solve is nobody's ever going to decrease your taxes locally because they benefit from eating up whatever percent somebody else gives up. It's going to get eaten up by somebody else. So your tax rate really never goes down. And that's a little bit of a fault of the tax caps, which were a good idea, but we didn't really foresee this coming. And so looking at as a whole, we want everybody to remain whole in that percentage, that tax rate that they charge, but not be able to eat up another part. So that's what we're trying to get to. So when you talk about a rate-based system, that's really what people are talking about trying to get to. So it gets really confusing. Even for those people, I tell you that there's probably 5 people in Indiana that understand property tax as a whole, because it's really complicated. And my intern this year, he's 6 weeks into a project of him diagramming out on a giant piece of paper how property taxes work in Indiana. He's probably only about a third of the way there on where each individual lever can get. And that was if that tells you how little we know about the system and how complex it really is a problem from that standpoint alone. So when a local government or a school or somebody comes to me and says, hey, we need the money, I have to ask why, and I have to ask what levers they have. So now when we're talking about schools, you have referenda and you also have bonds, geo bonds in that. So when schools roll over debt, we don't have an active referenda in Allen County right now in East Allen, right? But we have debt that gets rolled over and that gets snowballed. So the benefit to the school is to keep rolling that debt over. That becomes a big problem over time where you have no say as a local on the amount of money there that keeps getting added or keeps getting rolled over in those. And so a big part of our tax base that's there for our school hasn't been voted on for a long time. So that's a big part of the discussion on the school side is we're okay with the schools asking for those dollars from the taxpayer, but we want them to have to ask for it. And we want the locals to decide what that is. Because when you look at a raise in the amount of money going to local schools, it really has been a lot more. And I can't really justify a lot of that. Even though I've told I want to keep the schools as whole as possible, I want them to ask for that money as they go forward. Because when you look at local governments, the amount of taxes that have been paid on a bill, and the individual tax bills that have gone up, that you can see the system really isn't fair the way it is now. So if you had to ask me today, what are we going to do going forward, and what I'm asking to be done from my standpoint, and then I'll talk about what's probably going to happen. I would like property taxes to go away personally. I don't have the answer for that. So you in the room that are going to tell me, hey, I don't like property taxes, I want it to go away. The system that we have come up with, or we think we can come up with to get rid of property taxes, is not good right now. You're going to have increased taxes in other areas, income tax, things like that are probably better in the long term to be based on income or, sales tax, those kind of things. Those are consumption and production taxes. So they're bad in their own right, but they're better than the perpetual tax that property tax is. So I'm going to move away from that discussion because I don't have the answer there. But we want to control growth long-term, right? And so that's the problem with tax bills. I'm not even worried about assessed value, but when you talk about tax bills, the rapid growth in tax bills has outpaced inflation, and inflation's been used as cover to increase tax bills. And so that's a problem for local governments, because immediately when we start talking about property tax, everybody comes out of the woodwork screaming about don't lower our budgets, don't lower our levies, our schools need this money. And I immediately ask why, and it's really hard for people to justify the increased tax revenue in some of the spaces. They've gotten used to it, but it's really hard. And it's our job to protect the taxpayer, the individual. And so when you look at the system, who's got picked on the most, it is the individual taxpayer. It's not corporations. It's not farms have gone up a little bit, but it's the homestead property tax homeowner, the person who lives in their house, who's going to be there in the community for a long time. They've been picked on the most. And so to develop a system going forward, what I would like to see, and what I think most people are talking about, is how do we control that growth, and how do we move away from the dependence on the increase on property taxes on the individual homeowner at their homestead? How do we move away from that? Because that's who we're picking on for the last 10 years. And really in the last 3 years, whose bills have skyrocketed are the homestead property. And so when you see the new 300-page amendment come through the House next week, that's really the gist of that. And I'm sure Representative Smaltz will have a lot to say about that too, but we're not done. There's still a lot of back and forth and discussion. The governor's been really loud that we're not doing enough. But I will say the governor's where I was when I started this conversation just a minute ago. He does not have the answer to how do we move away from property tax. his proposal doesn't get us away from property tax any more than the House proposal or the Senate proposal. I think the only win for property taxpayers is to get rid of the property tax system on residential homesteads. That's a $3 billion proposition for Indiana. I don't think he has the answer for that either. And so until we can get there, I think controlling growth and moving every year away from dependence on homestead residences is probably the right answer. And I think that's kind of where we'll land. So I'll stop at that.
Thank you. Representative Smaltz, I'll give you time to give yourself a brief introduction, and then I'll also restate the question just to.
Sounds like about property tax.
Absolutely.
Hey, good morning. Sorry it's late. I was at another meeting in Angola. Turn my mic on. I just want to say really quick, this is going to be live streamed. I'm really excited about that because I wrote the live streaming bill 2 years ago. I thought it was important for people in communities to be able to watch their government in action. And, you know, I know how it is. I'm a grandpa. I was a dad, soccer, baseball, church. You got all sorts of activities. And sometimes you don't get to see what your government does. And that helps a lot. So I want to thank Auburn for being a leader in that and getting live streaming going. We do it at the state, the General Assembly. If you want to watch what we do, you can. And I think that's important. I've always said you put a camera on a school bus, you're going to get better behaved kids. You put a camera in a government room, you're going to get better government. So thank you for doing that. So a couple of things. I guess we're going to talk about property taxes. So I'll just talk about some things that I'm working on for you in the General Assembly. Pretty wide breadth of things. Kind of in the big picture, I'm working on House 1004. It's a bill that tries to rein in some of the nonprofit hospital systems in the state of Indiana. Not the little guys. We're really focusing on about 6 systems that frequently plead poverty to us while they have billions and billions of dollars in the bank. Recently, I had one say, well, if you move us over to for-profit, what happens to, don't you appreciate the $500 million of community benefit that we provide? And I said, no, I don't appreciate that. I expect it. You're a nonprofit. That's our money. And if your strategy for marketing would be to remove that when you become for-profit, then I don't think that works very well, but Lutheran would sure like to name a baseball stadium, I'd bet. So we really have to get them under control where we're not among the highest state for healthcare costs in the entire union. I think we're number 9 right now for costs. Other states have figured it out. We need to figure it out. So we're leaning in there. Been working on some sex offender language. I don't know if you've been following that at all. Northeast Indiana, about 60% of the sex offenders that are here aren't from here, didn't offend here. They're just ending up here. And we really looked into it, and there seems to be a process of offender dumping where other communities are more than happy to see their offenders go somewhere else. Well, we've kind of caught them doing it in Northeast Indiana. So we've changed the law. It passed the House unanimously every step of the way, passed the Senate unanimously. Thank you for your support. It's at the governor's office. And what that would say is the sending judge has to agree to that offender leaving that community, but the receiving judge has to agree as well. And that gives that community the ability to say, this person is coming, this is what they've done to law enforcement, to probation, so that they can be monitored when they're here. And we put some really strict guidelines. You have to have a family hook here. Talk about a mom, a dad, a spouse, an adult child. You need to have a job, and you need to have living arrangements. Everything needs to be here for you to come here. You can't just come here. So working in that space, working on some Second Amendment stuff. I do a lot of that. We have a red flag law in Indiana that was passed about 25 years ago, and incrementally we're working on making it less bad. Initially it was pretty rough. Right now, if somebody accuses a citizen of being dangerous to themselves or others, called red flagging, that citizen can go talk to the judge within 14 days, and the judge says one of 2 things. Yes, you are dangerous, or no, you are not. In the case of no, you're not, you go home, everything's fine, except that stays on your record, public facing. People can see it. And unless you know what you're looking at and you see that and you're doing some background for somebody to come work for you, or maybe you want to coach a little league team, or you want to work in a school, maybe somebody doesn't read through and say, oh, you were found to be just fine, it was wrong. So what we're saying is that goes away. Everybody from from today, and that's been signed into law by the governor earlier this week. Everybody before who is found to be not dangerous, all of that's going to get expunged off of their records, and it should be. So that working in that Second Amendment space, working in some election space, so all over the place. I like to think of legislation in two things. You work in the big picture, like 1004, we're trying to work on healthcare costs, big team effort, big heavy lift. And then there's working in the margins. That's where you have constituents come and say, I have this problem. Can you help me? One of them is with prescription drugs. You probably have never heard of something called an accumulator or a maximizer, but they're schemes that are operated by pharmacy benefit managers and insurers. So what happens is with a maximizer, there are drugs that are essential health benefits, and they have to be insured a certain way. So they'll just say those aren't essential health benefits. And then you pay more, which is what their goal is. With an accumulator, it's where somebody helps you pay for your prescriptions, but the insurance or the PBM says, no, that doesn't count towards your out-of-pocket, your deductible, or your copay. So I've talked to these guys and I said, okay, wait a minute. So if a church, if my mom, if a pharmaceutical, largely they do it, if they lean in and pay the pharmacy for my medicine directly, that doesn't count. They're like, that's right. I said, okay, what if the church gives me the money and I go pay for it myself? Oh yeah, that's fine. I'm like, okay, wait a minute. What difference does it make? Well, it makes a big difference to them, to their profit margin. So healthcare is a cash cow for a lot of entities, and we're trying to dice it up. So working on that, and I've got that bill that is passed. That passed the House. That passed the Senate. Thanks again. It's in what's called conference committee right now. We're just trying to change a couple of definitions to make it better. But if we can't change the definitions, we are ready to concur on it and send it to the governor's desk. So that has been a great success as well. Working on some elections. Right now, we have municipal elections that are run separately of everybody else's elections. And the problem with that is the voter turnout is abysmal. It's so low, and it costs a ton of money. In one county, I found it costs $38 per vote they get when they operate a municipal election. So why don't they have their elections with us, with the General Assembly? I run every time. Every 2 years, I'm running. Why don't we put them in with us? And then we started talking about, well, what if we put the counties and the municipalities together to make it truly a local election? There'd be more people on the ballot that way, really local issues. So the more we talked about it, the more we decided, let's take a better look at it. Let's take testimony over the summer and then come back next session with a good bill. And I appreciate that about our leadership, about doing the right thing, not just doing something. And when an idea isn't fully ready, I appreciate it when somebody says the idea is not fully ready. We can do this better. And, it challenges me as a legislator to work harder and find a better way. So we're going to work harder and we're going to try and find a better way. So those are just some of the things that we're working on. I will tell you, because I don't know what all we've talked about, but I will tell you that as far as the state budget goes, I know we watch a lot of federal stuff going on. State's not like that. We're going to balance your budget. We are not going to spend more money than is coming in. We are going to save money for a rainy day. We are not going to spend money we don't have. And we won't know until April 16th when we get our forecast how much money we're going to have. And it's like that's how we all operate, right? You operate on the money that you have, not the money that you want. And to kind of dovetail in, I was taking notes as fast as I could with Tyler, and he hit on almost every point. But one of the big differences is state government operates on how much money are we going to have to operate with? Okay, let's operate. Local government doesn't do that. They say how much money they want to operate with or they think they need, and then they collect it. I mean, I think that where you have money that you know you have is a better way to do it. And I think we want to move that way. And we discovered, I didn't hear you say it, and you may have already, one of the things that really has me concerned about how we tax locally right now is our local debt. Across the state, it's $54 billion. Local units, that's counties, cities, schools, whatever the local unit is that's being funded by property taxes, it's $54 billion. Hey, great, local control, right? The problem is, in the state of Indiana, we're responsible, and we're not going to let a local unit default on a debt. So the state backstops and cosigns every one of those loans by law. So if anything goes wrong with that $54 billion, which is twice almost our 2-year budget for the entire state, the state has to come in and back that. So we've got to look at it. I think we're doing it responsibly. There is a 300-page amendment coming out. I can't wait to read it to understand what it does. But the reason it's operating that way is you've got the Senate, the second floor, which is the governor's office, and the House, and we're all trying to thread this needle to a place that we can all agree gets us somewhere productive. Nobody wants to kneecap local government. We want to fund our schools, really about controlling growth. How do we pass some meaningful credits or deductions for homesteads? Used to be a third. Homesteads, farms, businesses. It's not like that anymore. It's almost half or nearly half homesteads, and the other two split up between farms and businesses. So how do we fix that? That's what we're trying to get to. So that's what this amendment's going to be about. We should have it. I would hope to have it today, but we may just have to wait till Monday. So anyway, that's my opening. So thank you very much.
One quick follow-up, and just as the others have shared, what committees that they're on as well. Would you care to share what committees?
Sure. I'm on the
that you're on?
elections committee, which I find to be a lot of fun. I think it's very important. It's important that we have elections that we can trust, that are fair, and that we can validate. So I think elections, very good. I'm on Ways and Means, so I'll get that. When that 300-page amendment comes out, I'm going to get it in my hand. It's going to still be warm. I'll get it. So hopefully soon. And I'm the chairman of Rules and Legislative Procedures. So I'm the guy that polices the legislators as they operate through the day. So sometimes you'll hear me call a rule violation, and I've had to do it before on policy I really liked. And I've had to tell the author, I'm like, man, I really like what you're trying to do here. You can't do it here though. You got to do it somewhere else. So I really, really do like being chair of Rules and Legislative Procedure. And I'm also on the Joint Rules Committee. So when there's a rule dispute between the House and the Senate, I participate in that. And thankfully, it's very, very rare that we haven't resolved all our rules issues before we start the session. It makes for a smoother operation.
Thank you. I'll move on to Senate Bill 2, Medicaid, which aims to implement better controls on Medicaid eligibility and reform the Healthy Indiana Plan to encourage personal responsibility. The question, what are the specific work requirements proposed for Medicaid recipients, and how will they be enforced? And I will open that up to who would like to take that on first.
Yeah, I have to look it up.
So I spent a lot of the summer looking at our growth in Medicaid. We had an issue where during COVID, we paused Medicaid disenrollment essentially. So you don't qualify for Medicaid, but you stayed on. And so I don't think it's that controversial that if you don't qualify for Medicaid, you shouldn't be on it. So that's a big part of what the bill discusses. Now, most people don't realize when we have a Medicaid plan, we aren't in control of what that plan looks like. We ask the federal government for permission for what the plan looks like. So as you can imagine, when you have one federal government regime in charge versus another, the rules change a little bit in that process. And so the work requirements are a big piece. We're talking about the Healthy Indiana Plan. We're not talking about Medicaid as a whole. So we're talking about able-bodied adults in this Healthy Indiana Plan. So it's folks that you have lower income, you are able-bodied, so you should be looking to work. But what most people don't realize, work requirements aren't just a job. It can be a volunteer position. It could be a student or education. A lot of those things, it's pursuing work, job training, those kind of things. So the definition is a lot broader. There's actually 7 things, which Ben may be pulling up, but there's 7 different categories that are defined as work in there. And a lot of those things you wouldn't really think of as a job on its face. But I do think it's important that you encourage people to get to full-time employment, whether it's job training or education or any of those other categories. And even some of them are caretakers for folks that fit into Medicaid traditionally. So folks with disabled kids or adult kids who are disabled, if you're a primary caretaker, that fits in that category also. And so a lot of those things really you wouldn't think of as a full-time job, but they do fit the definition that's in the bill.
Thank you.
Again, this is probably more Tyler's area than mine, but I will say that Medicaid was expanded so drastically during COVID. And as he said, people were not turned away from Medicaid. It was extended to cover situations, especially in-home type situations. When we were all staying at home and not working out of an office, there were issues that developed, for example, developmentally and disabled individuals in the home who previously would have gone to a group setting or would have been taken care of by in-home providers. Those providers weren't available because of COVID, and so family members were paid to take care of individuals in the home. Because of that, many families grew dependent on that money that was coming in from the federal government, and those programs were expanded terrifically. Multiple members of the same family were collecting to take care of that individual. And it was necessary because you did not have the in-home providers, number one. But what happened is, as always, you have some individuals who took advantage of the program. And they were running into six-figure payments for one individual in the home. Many members of the family were all qualifying. What has happened now, since we're now in post-COVID, there's more people that are in the business of taking care of people who are homebound. We're reviewing those programs. Where are those individuals who were previously working outside the home and previously weren't receiving Medicaid, type payments? And if they're no longer necessary and that's no longer a program that's available, then that can be cut back. Yes, they can say, well, we were being paid for this. Well, yes, you were, but there are other people providing that service, perhaps at a lower cost, and you have a job to do perhaps somewhere else. But we want to get this back in line because the cost exploded so terrifically during COVID, and those costs were so great that they just blew out the budget, if you will, on Medicaid. Asking your government to go in and review all its policies to look for waste, and I know there's a lot of criticism of the DOGE program in Washington, and yes, I'm sure there's probably some abuses even in that. But all of government at every level has a responsibility to pay pay the taxpayers' money and use it effectively. Use it for what it's intended for and not waste it. And I believe that's the responsibility of state government and the legislature, to review those programs, bring them back in line, make sure you're getting your benefit, your dollar for dollar benefit for the money you invested in the system. And I think a lot of that is what we're trying to do with the Medicaid program.
I will add to that too. I think most people are surprised by the number of people on Medicare, Medicaid that access the system. And so I was in the emergency department last night. It was actually something we were talking about a little bit. You look at Parkview, DeKalb, every hospital files like a 49-520. It's just a state Department of Health form. And you can look every year, the numbers increasingly going up. And it was thought to be a disaster when hospitals started crossing the 50% threshold about 2 decades ago. And so we would slowly increase up where it became a third, and then it became 40%, and then it became 50%. And as somebody who works in the healthcare space, emergency physicians haven't had a raise in 33 years, right? So most of you who are begging for that 3% year over year, I don't want you to feel sorry for me, but I want you to understand in the state payments, it's not gone up at all. And what happens over time is that increases, it really puts that undue burden on the private payers, the commercial payers. And so as we encourage more people to get on Medicaid, that's not always a good thing. And so we want to find where that good balance is. So it's anywhere between 60 and 70% of payers are on Medicare and Medicaid. in our area. And that's not a good thing for our systems overall. And when you look at, we were talking about healthcare costs earlier, if Medicaid pays pennies on the dollar, about 7 cents on a dollar for an emergency department physician of what our costs are, then somebody else is making up for that. And so we're asking as a state, when we pay that Medicaid claim, we're asking for everybody else to pay it on top of that. And so finding the right balance of who's on Medicaid and what we pay for Medicaid is really important. And a big part of this discussion that we're having with Senate Bill 2 now is finding that right balance. So it's not just about work requirements and all of those type of things. It's about making sure our state agency gets it right in the long run.
It's definitely Tyler's space, I mean, for sure. But I'll let you know what the work requirements are. But before I do that, one of the things Senate Bill 2 does is when we go through hearings, where it's a committee hearing, so we're hearing from the public, and we had a constituent from Indianapolis come in, and he's disabled, he's a mental disability, and he testified that he wants to get married, and she has a disability as well. But between the two of them, they had more than $3,000 in assets, and they would lose their assistance. That's one of the last places in code where there's a marriage penalty. And he brought that to our attention. So we raised that threshold amount so they would not lose their benefits, and people just like them would not lose their benefits if they want to go through life together and figure it out. So just one of the cool things that we figure out in committees. But the work requirements, you got to be working 20 hours a week on a monthly average. You're participating in and complying with the requirements of a work program for at least 20 weeks. You're volunteering for at least 20 weeks. But that volunteerism has to be an approved. You can't just volunteer like to do my lawn work. I mean, you guys got to be something valid. Any combination of those three that you participate in, work program, workforce program, you're on unemployment and you're complying with all of the requirements of unemployment. You are in a substance abuse treatment rehabilitation program that prevents you from working. You're medically certified that you can't work. You're pregnant, or you're a caregiver responsible for the care of a child less than 6 years in age. You're the parent, spouse, caretaker, personally providing care for an individual with a serious medical condition. You're an individual who's been released from jail for less than 90 days. So if you just got out of jail, come on, let's get on your feet. And you're an Indiana resident enrolled in an accredited school. So those are the 12 things that came up in committee for work requirements. And I thought it was pretty well balanced, that we're not saying, hey, I expect you to work 40 plus 20. I don't care if you have kids at home. None of that matters to me, what your challenges are. It was really thoughtful. And Chairman Barrett, the chair of Health Committee, was very concerned about trying to get that to the right place. And as a matter of fact, we just amended this bill. It's one of the things I was looking for, to add spouse, because we all know somebody whose spouse is sick at home and the spouse can't work because they're caring for him. So we're really trying to think of those things. So
Thank you. Change course a little bit here on Senator Glick had mentioned the small nuclear reactors. House Bill 1007 aims to support the development of small modular nuclear reactors, or known as SMRs, and to ensure adequate energy generation resources to meet the state's growing power demands. The bill proposes tax incentives for SMR manufacturers and establishes procedures for energy utilities to seek approval for expedited generation resource plans. So the question is, what specific tax incentives does House Bill 1007 offer to manufacturers of small modular nuclear reactors, and how might these incentives impact Indiana's economy? As we look at different power generation sources, what does the SMR, what can it do for us in Indiana as we look at power generation and moving forward?
What the biggest concern is, and I won't get clear down into the weeds about the taxation. The biggest concern in that bill is we don't want to see the ratepayers have to be taxed, or they're being forced to pay in anticipation of the building of that nuclear reactor. Nobody wants to pay ahead of time for a reactor that will never be built. And that's what we got into a few years ago. The private company that built a reactor in southern Indiana never opened its doors. and yet they are still paying on the rates that were established in order to pay for something that was never built. So the real concern is to structure it in such a way that if they're building a reactor, that it is factored in, just as you would factor if the local utility was going to build a new generation plant, that they would have a responsibility to pay for that. They couldn't just borrow the money and hope to pay it back 10 years when it goes online. They have to factor it into their rate structure in order to build it, pay for it as they build it. By the same token, we want the people who are building a small nuclear reactor to be in the same boat, but we also don't want them to, because there is an extreme cost on that, mostly because of the regulations, if you will. And so what we want to do is factor that in there, make sure it is not so high and that it is not an anticipation that might fail, that they might be paying on something that's never built. So, I'm not going to get into dollars and cents and all that. I'm not a tax person. But we, you have to protect the taxpayer, the ratepayer, in anticipation of that bill. Yes, we want some of these things, but we have to know what we can afford and what we can't afford. And we want the Utility Regulatory Commission to be involved in that process, so they have the guidance of the national nuclear groups, so that they have expertise behind them, so they can make a reasonable decision on what is fair and what is reasonable.
I think you heard Senator Glick say earlier, and it's why I appreciate her expertise there, is she has a very much a natural resource and environment approach on a lot of things and how we protect that when she was talking about aquifers and those kind of things. And I think that angle is really important here also, because SMRs, the nuclear reactors, get a bad rap because you think of the large nuclear reactor plants. It's not even the same technology when you think about it. It's nuclear, but it's not even close. And so I would stick a nuclear reactor in my backyard and not worry about it. I really would. These small nuclear reactors have been on subs and on aircraft carriers. We're talking 50-year-old technology with a very good track record. And I really believe that because I had an uncle who slept next to one for months at a time and was told not to worry about it. And he never did, because the track record there is very good. And it's a very different technology than what you think of 3 Mile Island or even Cook nuclear power plant that's just north of us. And so it's a very, very different technology. And it can be, the hope of it is that it can be reproduced and built in a modular fashion so you can mass produce these. Your risks with the type of nuclear fuel is much less. Even for diversion or theft, it's not the same type that you would think of as being a security risk. There are still some security risks with having it, but not to the scale that you would think of otherwise. And so when you think of these data centers going in and you think about our discussions around solar, I don't mind all the above approach, but when you really look at long-term sustainability, these small nuclear reactors are our best option that we have on the table right now. When you think about wind, water, solar, they don't even touch the amount of production you can get, and clean production at that you can get out of a small nuclear reactor. And when you talk about Google data centers, we can talk about whether they're good or bad, but they're coming and they're there. And if we're going to do those type of things, we need to have long-term power solutions so that when I go to flip my switch on in my house, it's there. And it really, these are the type of things that we need to move along. And politics is getting into it a little bit. And I don't like that, because you have a lot of good technologies that are there. And that's why we're talking about having locations in Southern Indiana that are well protected, and we can kind of get people used to these type of technologies when the science and the data really backs up their use widespread. And the only reason it's been slow is because of the history of nuclear technology on a large scale, when we kind of get those confounded. And people are rightfully skeptical, but we're not talking about these being introduced tomorrow in the first introduction. There's a 50-year history of small nuclear reactors. And that's why I probably am more, I think it's more promising, and it's better technology, and it has less risk factors. If you think about wind and solar from that, and even some of the hydro technology has less damage to the environment than those do. And so The tax structure that they have around it, we're really looking, as Senator Glick said, to make sure we don't have huge hits to the tax. It's not even really tax rate as much as it is the ratepayer in those systems, so that you don't have a huge swing, and it allows, I think it was 80-20 if I remember right in the bill on the rate payments. And so, they can build some of that in, so it's a gradual payment rather than huge swings in the rate. And if you look long term, it should actually improve your rate long term with a little bit of a short term increase, which nobody wants. But
yeah, that's similar to what we do with other generating build outs. Is you split out the cost. And I talked to Steve Baker, he's president of I&M, and I said, so what's the plan with the SMRs? And he said, well, so we're looking at what's happening in Georgia right now, because there's a power company that's putting SMRs in, and they're having some trouble with it. They're not getting it right. They're putting infrastructure in, they're pulling it out, they're trying to build it, they're trying to get it right, and they're going to get it right. But he said the way it's going to work is the Tennessee Valley Authority is ordered for SMRs. We have ordered for SMRs, and Ontario Power is ordered for. So TVA is watching very closely and working with Georgia on what's happening there, so they don't make the same mistakes when they put it in Tennessee. Then I&M is looking at Tennessee, and we'll be collaborating with them, because it's very collaborative. These guys it's not secretive. They're working together. These bunch of Navy engineers largely. TVA is going to do it. Then I&M will do it based on what TVA did, and then Ontario is going to come in. So they're all working together to try and find the right way. And interestingly, these small modular reactors, many are made in Indiana, in southern Indiana, at a company called Babcock and Wilcox. They've been putting them in ships for forever. I talked to a Navy captain, he's submarine, cool guy, and he said, we expect 0% leak, because we are all dead if it leaks one little bit in that tube. And he said, we've been doing it for decades. So, and I would say that power, when it's generated, it goes on to something similar to a stock exchange of power called MISO, M-I-S-O. Don't ask me what MISO means. I just know it's MISO. And it's just like the stock exchange, but this power today is probably coming from the Cook nuclear plant. Most of the power in Northeast Indiana is coming from the nukes. We don't have coal. Probably going to see these SMRs go at the Rockport facility in southern Indiana first. It's a retiring coal facility, and they've got the space to do it. They have 4,500 acres, but you don't need 450 acres for one of these. You're very likely to see these start going into repurposed coal mines, because they're already subgrade. The infrastructure is largely there already. So I don't think we're going to see them in Northeast Indiana anytime soon. We're going to see the juice, but we're not going to see the plants here. They have been able to take that down to about a 7-year turnaround time from project inception to the first electrons moving, and that's down from 10 years. So I think they're trying to balance it out and get it right, which I appreciate, and you're pretty open with it. So yeah, I think that as far as the question is taxes, and I think it's 80-20, and you're right. And we do that with almost every power generation facility, that we allow them to spread it over the rate base, because they'd like to put it all on faster than we want to see rates go up.
Thank you all. We talked education funding a bit. Considering the proposed budget increases for K-12 education funding by 2% annually, how will this affect particularly public schools, and what steps are being taken to address concerns about equitable funding, especially with mandates to share revenues with charter schools?
yeah, so Senate Bill, I think it was 518, talked about charter schools and public schools, and there's a whole scheme in there about how many. I think we landed on 100, if I remember correctly. I do want folks here to understand that we talk about 1,500 bills every year. So some of these things that we talk about recently, and some was 2 months ago. And so, but when this bill, on the larger picture, we talked about property tax. Now, my only concern is doing too many things at once with the property tax sharing amongst charter schools. in Indiana, we really, as a legislature, have created the policy that the dollars follow the student. We do that with our state funding. And when we talk about charter schools in some areas, we're not charter school heavy in Northeast Indiana. You know, I have one charter school in my district in Fort Wayne. And so when we talk about that, that just tells you we have good quality schools in our area. That is not reproduced across Indiana. So when we go down to the state house, we both represent our district in the state. And so finding ways to make sure that a school that may not look like a traditional public school, but is a charter school, can get funding to help with their infrastructure and their and the building projects. That is what the sharing is talking about of property tax dollars. It's super controversial. I understand that because it's a new concept in Indiana. But when you look at it based on the individual schools, it's not so controversial in the areas where it would be very effective. And based on the number of students that go to Timothy L. Johnson in no relation, so don't think I'm moving dollars to anybody I know, but based on that, I don't know that it's a good thing or not in our area because it's just not a very common thing. But when you look around the Indianapolis area, it's very easy to see that there's a charter school outperforming a public school, and kids are choosing to walk and go to those schools for a reason. And so having funding that follows that seems like a good idea. Now, my caution is in the bigger property tax discussion with SB1, how do those things mesh and what happens to those individual schools? I don't know that we have a complete answer to that. And so the discussion is very much ongoing. And I voted for that bill, understanding that those things would need to mesh. And I think when you get to the legislature, you have a little bit more trust in the system when you get there. I still don't trust the system because it's a difficult process, as these two will back me up on. As the bills move, you may support a concept and the bill changes as it goes. And that's probably this bill. The idea is not bad on a whole, but understanding how it interacts with SB1 and the whole system in our schools locally is something that we very much have to understand as it moves forward. And so I've got a lot of caution with it, understanding I support the idea.
Well, Ronald Reagan, trust but verify. And I think that's where we're at the state level. There are a lot of bills. I think there was over 1,000 introduced after a 4-month-long session. We're winnowing those down very quickly. But, you know, you look at this stuff when it first hits the airwaves, and many times you see it in its original form. People don't follow the bill very closely. They don't see the amendments that are made, or the fact that many of those bills were introduced because someone asked their legislator, please do something about X. And so they filed a bill to do something about X, and that bill never made it out of committee, never was assigned, never saw the light of day, but it's still in the hopper. And so then people get concerned about language. There was a bill at one point that would have said any child that started in a public school system and was withdrawn, if over 50% of that school system had children withdrawn from the public schools, then they could dissolve that corporation. Well, that sounded good in some respects, or maybe it said that, and it actually was aimed at the Indianapolis public school system, because a lot of those kids are being pulled out to be sent to either parochials or charters or what have you. Unfortunately, if you know anything about the Westview school system, which is one of the premier systems and certainly a good one in my district, about, the Amish population almost universally enrolls their kids in the Westview School Corporation, sends their kids to school for the first year or so to learn English. They're English language learners, if you will. But they do that so they can learn English, then they withdraw and put them in their parochial schools, which are very good for their lifestyle and for what they wish. But that would have meant 2,100 kids are being withdrawn from the Westview School Corporation, which would have overwhelmed the system. And under that bill, which was offered to solve a problem over here, it would have dissolved the Westview School Corporation. Well-intentioned, but not well implied. And it didn't see the light of day, it went away. So unless it gets resurrected in the last few weeks and stuck in another bill, but I have to watch things like that. All of us do. Those things come out of the woodwork, they're dredged up from someplace, and maybe they're well intentioned for the reason they were introduced, but they would have very negative impact on lots of good school corporations or good areas. We see that all the time, and we just have to be vigilant as to what a bill is going to do or how it will impact in a negative fashion. And so we try and do our best. Once in a while, some of these get a little farther than others, but we just have to be mindful that, what you do over here has significant impact over there. And with 92 counties, we just have to be, as I said, ever vigilant.
So I'll just tell you just some funding for schools. This is just state tuition support. Schools get funding from all sorts of different funding silos, federal, local, and state. As far as state goes, I think DeKalb Eastern is going to be plus 2.2%. I think Central and Garrett are going to be about 3%. A lot of factors go into that. One of them is the complexity. We're talking about financially disadvantaged kids who are on free and reduced lunch, that they get a complexity bump. So if you really want to know how much money a school corporation gets from all the sources, you want to write this down. It's the Distressed Unit Appeal Board. If you go to the in.gov Distressed Unit Appeal Board, you're going to be able to look at each school corporation and see how much they get in property taxes, how much they're getting from state support, how much they're getting for bond, if they've got a bond out, and how much they're getting from the feds. And some of it's pretty surprising. If you want to look at what your school corporations are really getting for money, it's the DUAB, the Distressed Unit Appeal Board. And we look at that to see who really is getting funded to what level and where that money is going. So I would say that to piggyback on what Senator Glick has said, the process is stringent. You've got to get the bill. You have to get enough support to even get a hearing in committee. I had a bill that was my prescription drug bill, did not get a hearing the first half. So I still was working that chairman constantly as a pest. And I finally got the language in somebody else's bill, and it ultimately passed. But you have to go through the gatekeeper chairman. You have to go through the committee. You got to get voted out of committee. You got to get it on the House floor and read twice. Then it goes over to the Senate and it starts over. And the Senate normally is pretty good about making bills better. I only say that because I think I have a bill in front of both of these guys soon. But you have to go through the whole process again. And normally good floats, bad sinks. Not always. And so there's some stinkers that get along the way, but at some point you realize, well, that bill's not very good, and all of a sudden it just stops moving. So I appreciate the process a lot.
All right. At this time, we will begin to open up for questions from the crowd. As we are being live streamed, recorded for the city's page here, we'll ask that folks that want to ask questions, please step up to the podium, and that way we can get those heard, and we'll begin that process, and we'll take about. And please state your name when asking those questions. And we'll have about roughly 35 minutes for questions here.
Am I good to go?
Technical difficulties. It's the
It's
live
okay.
streaming, don't you know?
I get that.
Just want to make sure everybody's mics are working. We'll test that one. Okay. You're good.
All right. Hi, I'm Lindsay Brown. I live here in Auburn, and I am an elementary school teacher in Garrett. I really appreciate you all coming out today. This really means a lot, and I'm glad we're finally to the forum part of this instead of the lecture. Anyway, Dr. Johnson, I was really listening intently to what you were saying regarding education earlier. And I have to be completely honest. You had made the comment about public schools eating money. And in my position as a teacher, I don't see us as eating money. I see us as feeding children, feeding young minds and helping them to grow. And as a public school teacher, I was disappointed to hear education funding described in kind of a dismissive way. And this is just my perceptive or my perception. Schools across Indiana are already struggling with limited resources, providing academic instruction, emotional support, meals, etc. And with potential reductions in both federal and state funding, the challenges are going to only be growing. And I'm also saying this not just as a teacher, but as also someone who's chaired collective bargaining in my district. We're facing, it looks like, and you know more about this than I do, a $370 million shortfall between 2026 and 2028 due to proposed property tax reforms and federal funding cuts, including suspension of grants. And that just threatens to further diminish our ability to serve our students well. If we take away property taxes without a sustainable replacement, I'm curious, how do you expect our schools to continue meeting the needs of not just our students, but also our communities, where they're going to be growing and learning and interacting and hopefully becoming an engaged part of our citizenry here? So can you speak a little more to that for me, please?
Yes, definitely. And, choice of words, but I want to start by saying my mom was a teacher. My brother's a teacher. My aunt and uncles are all teachers. So this is something I've heard already. So you're not surprising me with
Great.
anything.
I'm so glad.
So you're good. And I'm an advocate
I
every
am
year
great.
about making sure we get teacher pay to where it needs to be. So, and those are all these different discussions. So when we talk about local property taxes, money's fungible though, right? So when you start talking about operating income and building funds and those kind of things, so money is money. But what we're talking about is how we approve those dollars. We want people to actually approve them for referenda and those kind of things. So that's when when we talk about the rates and how they get, that's when I make those type of statements, right? So we want to make sure that it's a fair system across the board. It's not against schools or anything like that. And your superintendents, I've had a lot of discussion with in Allen County and DeKalb County about making sure we know exactly those outcomes. So the initial bill had huge cuts to schools. And when you look at the changes the Senate made and the House made, there are some, changes in school funding, but it's not the drastic cuts that were in the initial bill. And there's a reason for that. Because you can't pull the rug out from under folks, but moving forward, you can have a different system on how we do referenda and bonding and those kind of things. So we make sure that we understand where those dollars are coming from. And that's the responsibility that I'm talking about to the taxpayer more than anything. And so if people want to approve that and they want to discuss where those dollars come from, I think it's something that it's a responsible thing to ask for.
Can I just interject something right here? One of the concerns we have right now at the State House is with the idea of doing away with the federal U.S. Department of Education. There is a lot of concern at the State House. What does that mean in terms of the money that has been sent to the federal government through tax dollars and how that money is going to come back and how it's going to impact our schools? For those of you who are kind of on the edge of and not really in the middle of education, tremendous amounts of federal funding come back to the schools in the form of programs and grants. And this money comes back and it enhances their programs on a daily basis. It is a supplement to the states, the amount of money the state puts into the funding. And any change as drastic as that at the federal level is going to have some significant impact on schools across the board. These are all our kids. And we really have focused eyes from the State House on what's happening in Washington, which we have to do in many areas. But this is a real concern for us, as I know it is for all of the people who are involved with education on a daily basis. What's going to happen and how it's going to impact the kids is really significant. And we have to react to that. And we're watching that very closely.
Thank you.
I'm just going to address the Senate Bill 1 question. I think that was the original version that you might have been referencing, because in our most recent version, things.
I wasn't referencing a bill, just so you know. I was
Okay.
just
number-
responding to his
The
comments.
number came from somewhere, and I've heard that number very close as reference to the original Senate bill.
Mhm.
As it is now, it doesn't even start phasing in until 2028.
Mhm.
So there's some time for us to take a look at what we're doing. What it does do is it creates some property tax credits now for homeowners. It does some other things, but I don't see that impact happening next year. I don't see that.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you.
But there's a 300-page amendment that I haven't read yet. That I will know more when I get that.
Okay. I look forward to reading it too.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time.
My name is Susan Catterall. I live in Steuben County in the Hamilton Lake area. I have a map here of eastern Steuben County. These black dots on this map represent farms associated with the Smucker family farms. This map was done last fall by a member of the Steuben County Watershed Protection Group. We have 61 farms as of last fall in a 16-mile radius. 61. This is just eastern Steuben County and some farms, a few on the Ohio line. Senator Glick, I ran into you a year and a half ago at a candidates forum at Trine University. When I asked you about Noah Smucker, you called him an expletive, which I will not say today. And when I asked you if he was on the state's radar, you told me yes, he was. Representative Smaltz, over a year ago, I convinced you to come to Steuben County, where a small group of us took you on a tour of the area and provided you with some disgusting drone footage. The state of Ohio has slapped Smucker family farms with numerous violations and fines based on complaint-driven investigations. When I talked to my commissioner, Will Howard, and I said, you know what they're doing in Ohio, they're doing in Indiana, he looked me straight in the eyes and said, oh, we know they are. When does the state of Indiana step up like Ohio did and investigate this JBS-backed abomination? Whatever group is controlling this mess, they have their hooks firmly in the Amish community. And the Amish are an easy target. They look for rural, uneducated farmers. And that's what's happening in Steuben County and DeKalb County. When do your tax-paying, property owner constituents get some relief from this? How do we fight JBS?
So I think that's a fair point. You and I met over a year ago. We did tour the properties. We did see the pictures. Everything you provided me with, I provided to IDEM. We were able to get inspections in so much as we could get them as quickly as possible. We did trigger them 2 weeks later. We were looking for, the rule is 30 acres, 300 head for cattle. And let's just talk about the cattle because that's what's going on up there.
Yes.
I'm aware of it going through Black Creek. I'm aware of it going through Fish Creek. I'm aware of it going down into Hamilton Lake.
Yes, they've just gotten a really big grant.
IDEM did at the very best we could do an inspection they weren't aware of, but there were no violations when they got there.
I think they were aware of it.
And that may be, I don't know that.
Before IDEM got there, I traveled over there and they were scraping manure off the ground as fast as they could.
Well, at least they cleaned it up.
Representative Smaltz, if we can, just the mic. Sorry, we're having a little trouble getting the
So
recording.
what you
so
can
thank
do at a local, because the way the law works is the state of Indiana is going to set a threshold for what they are capable of monitoring. And it's 30 acres, 300 head. But a local unit can implement an ordinance that is not less restrictive than the state rule. So as a county, you can say, we want to have an ordinance in place that requires permitting for 30 acres, 300 cattle down to 10 acres, 100, or whatever you want that to be. And that'll let the local unit go out and inspect, not through the state, but through their local health department and count. Because the count is really the problem. How many cows are in that barn? And it's hard to see from drone footage. It's hard to see unless you're actually in the building. So there is a way that local units can control that some. And I'd encourage them to write an ordinance, to work with ag, because they're not all bad actors. So the rules have to be fair to everybody. But I think the local units can lean in and do something about it. And you and I both know that those cows run across that state line like they're
Yep.
buying beer when they're underage.
Yes.
So that we
Yes,
know
they
it's happening.
do.
Yes, because I was alive then. So we know that's happening.
Yes.
And I think it may be best resolved with a local ordinance that allows locals to go out and count and see what's going on there. That would be my opinion.
We're trying to work with our plan commission right now to go from the hobby farmers to the 299.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing we see an issue with is the manure management.
Yeah, going into the creek.
They do not have manure management plans, and they don't have to have manure management plans because they're not permitted. They're unregulated. So that's the biggest issue we're seeing.
I think you could do that at a local level. And I also know that you're monitoring the E. coli in the streams, and you can see it at one rate before the farms and at another rate after the farm. So we know it's happening. They need to have a manure management plan. And I think locally they can do, there's a lot to be said about local control, best suited at the local level.
Okay.
Hello, Lynn Reinhardt, and I had a couple follow-up questions regarding the prior property tax discussion, but I first need to address one of the last comments that was made regarding the rural uneducated farmers. Well, let me tell you, I am proud to represent one of those farmers. I was a valedictorian of my class from Eastside High School. I made the decision to return to the family farm as a fourth generation. These farmers are not rural, uneducated people. Mr. Smucker is not an uneducated person. Not going to speak to his business's practices. That is a completely different discussion, but I don't appreciate those kind of portrayals. So with that, I would like to address both of the senators' prior comments on property tax discussion. And I believe Mrs. Glick indicated that we couldn't make major changes to the property tax system. Yet I see, I know that was a part of Governor Braun's platform that he ran on. And I'm just curious why he doesn't get the support at the state level that President Trump receives at the national level. National level, we're told that everything was a mandate with his election. I believe that Mr. Braun more easily defeated any of his opponents in the primary or general election. Why isn't his platform a mandate?
Well, I will say this about Senator Braun, now Governor Braun. When he came in, he wanted it changed in January. And when you have the whole system based on a budgetary process that takes months and almost a year to do, you can't immediately turn off the switch. You have to figure out how you shift that burden in a way that doesn't unfairly punish any one segment of that situation, of the populace. That's what we're trying to do. Property tax reform has to be fair. Taxes have to be fair. The people won't stand for it if they're not. And what the Senate is trying to do, what the House is trying to do, we're trying to find a workable plan that will work over time. The last time there was a major tax reform was back in 1973. It was revised again about 10 or 15 years later. It will be revised, many times in our lifetime. But we have to address the economic issues of the day as we go forward. The ship of state doesn't turn on a dime. If you base the payment of the bills on the property taxes, and I mean the schools, the local government, cities, towns, counties, fire departments, all of those on a tax system that has to do with property taxes, you can't simply flip the switch and say you don't have it anymore, figure it out. You have to have a ramp. You can't say, okay, we have a fire in one of our barns, but I don't have a fire department to get here. I mean, we have to figure that out. And that's what we're doing. We're trying to do it in a fashion that's a reasonable ramp, if you will, so that people know they're no longer going to have access to this much money in this fashion, and they can shift it over in a fair and just way to the other, the other tax methods, so that's all not, out of balance, if you will. That's what we're trying to do. And if we left the wrong impression, I apologize for that.
No, I truly do understand the situation that you're in, and it's not easy in your work going on with it. It's just a difference of what we're seeing at the national level, where you say it's something that can't be changed overnight. The things that we see being changed overnight in Washington, D.C., and I realize some of them have unintended consequences as well. So it is prudent that you do explore everything before making those decisions. And then the second part of that, I would like to follow up with Senator Johnson. And his initial comment that I would like to applaud was that he thought that we could do away with property taxes. I had a little more concern as that discussion went on, and you seem to believe that the burden of property taxes is on the homeowner and not the farmer or commercial. And I believe you actually said you wanted to eliminate property taxes on homesteads. I don't believe you indicated that you were going to do away with all property taxes. I have looked at farmland property taxes in Stafford Township. Bearland has increased 70% over 3 years. No, it hasn't doubled, but neither have homes. I looked at 2 homes just up the road from us. A big discrepancy. One of them increased 27%. The other one was up 93.5%. So it shows the problems that there are in the inequities of property tax systems. And I guess if you could just address the way
I appreciate the comments, but it really, first to the first comment, it's easy to make a broad policy statement. In the Senate, I can't speak for the House, but we are very deliberative. It is our job to figure out the exact policy to bring forward. That can be really difficult on issues like this. And that's coming from somebody, I like to get in the weeds. I like to know every dollar amount. Every day in the Senate right now, we get a packet about that thick of all the runs for schools and locals. And so I want to understand every bit of that. That's very difficult. It's very easy for me to say, I don't like property taxes. We should get rid of property taxes. Very easy statement to make. Philosophically, I'm there. But figuring out how to move away from homesteads is easier than going away from farms and going away from doing it all. It gets incrementally more difficult as you go down that. And so if I had it figured out, I would be there championing that idea. I do not have it figured out. If you want to sit down and help me get there, I'm happy to. But having a 5 or 7% income tax replace all of that you would be yelling at me for that too. So I want to deliberatively get there. And so I'm very comfortable saying that as a policy, it's a good thing to do to move away from property tax. I think the governor implemented SB 1. That was his language. And so I don't want to call it bad, but it wasn't doable in the form that it was presented initially. So we were presented with an idea that some of those pieces weren't even doable. And given the task very immediately, governor's elected in November, takes office second week of January. His proposals are there, but it's now our job to figure it out. And that's a very difficult process when you have 150 people weighing into it. We have 9 committee members on the tax and fiscal initially trying to find the right ideas. And they've been working on getting rid of income tax in Indiana for the last 2 or 3 years. And so it was a pivot, and trying to figure out where to land on that can be really difficult. Especially, I own farm ground, so I understand. I don't call myself a farmer for a reason, because I'm one of those uneducated farmers that they were talking about. So my brother-in-law is not, though. They farm a lot of acres in the Woodburn area. I talk to him regularly, so I think property tax on farm ground is an odd thing to me also. Even property tax on commercial is an odd thing too. So you're already paying taxes in what you produce and the amount of dollars there. So that shift is going to have to happen at some point if we move away from property taxes. And so we've got to figure that out before we do it. We can't just have a policy statement and say, hey, no more property taxes in Indiana. I don't think you would like the outcome of that over the next 5-10 years without some deliberative thought process and knowing what that does.
Then I'll follow up. I'll tell you, we want to see Governor Braun be successful, because if he's successful, we're successful. I think we want to work with him to get there and understand exactly what's happening. And currently, I just tell you, right now we're working on increasing the cap interest rate to 9% for farmland. And for everybody who doesn't know, farmland gets taxed at a different assessed valuation. It's based on the productivity of the acreage. So if you've got an acre, you can't tax it, and it's in a place where you could sell it for $25,000 an acre, but that's not what it's doing in use. You have to pay attention to that. So I think we're taxing those at $2,300 an acre. You know, I think
That sounds
probably about right. So
correct. Or
if we-
was last year, maybe.
Yeah, if we
It's-
do
there's
that-
substantial increases.
yeah, that's a $55 million reduction in property taxes paid by ag in 26, and over 3 years, it's going to be $140 million. So we're working on that. We're looking at it, and it's not just homeowners, but we're looking at ag too.
I would like to thank all of you for being here today and for your comments to my questions. Would like to thank Mr. Johnson for the offer to be part of the discussion on property tax. That I would be glad to accept that offer if there's an opportunity for that to work in the future. And just to follow up on your second comment about homesteads being the easiest place to eliminate property taxes, we also need to look at homesteads, homeowners, as being the major driver for the services that those property taxes fund. That being your schools, your police, your fire. Yet you are looking at removing that tax from those people that benefit from that tax, while I'm paying those taxes on my farmland that require very little services. But I'm more than happy to support our fire department, knowing that they will be there if and when I need them. So thank you.
Thanks.
We have about 10 minutes left for questions. So I'm going to ask those asking questions to do one question, and we'll keep that way we can get through as many folks as we can, please. Thank you.
Tiffany Utenich. I live here in Auburn. I have been a teacher at DeKalb Central for 27 years. I have a couple things. First of all, your bonding idea. Bondings pay for things like getting 50-year-old furniture out of my classroom this year. And it pays for my daughter, when she was in school, not being there till 9:30 at night to do winter drumline. It gives us space. Second of all, when you say referendum, we had one turned down here. Third, 3.3% only gets the lights on. It doesn't pay for more teachers. I work with 20-year-olds, 20 years and 30-year-olds that don't know if they can continue in this profession because the raises aren't there. The increments when I first started wasn't there. And it's really disheartening to know we have really good educators for our children. And we have children with so many needs that are saying, I can't sustain this. I can't pay for what the kids need. And the last thing is, right now, you only give us $150 per kid for all their school supplies. When my daughter graduated from DeKalb 2 years ago, her school supplies were $500. And we're eating that. And that's the money that goes to us as raises and goes to our kids for supplies. How is your idea of cutting and having us go backwards, which we have? Since I started teaching, we've got rid of so many teachers from what we had. Good for kids, because now we're looking at 30 kids in a classroom.
Yeah, I won't disagree with you on class size. It's something that I think is really important. We see consolidation actually throughout Indiana. There's a lot of factors, and House Bill 1002 is a big discussion going on right now about deregulating some of that, those things. I don't think we went very far with that bill in the end, but I think the referenda discussion is very, very interesting because you have asked locals whether this is worth paying for or not. And so that's a bigger discussion. And so I know it feels bad to have a referenda get turned down. But also, as Rep. Smaltz said, when we have $54 billion in outstanding debt, that's a cliff that could come due anytime. And so it's a bigger responsibility.
But we can only borrow what we already have in debt. When we pay off something, then we can add on to keep everybody's taxes the same. We're not out here raising people's taxes just so my kid doesn't have to be at school till 9:30 at night, or a kid sitting at a 50-year-old desk. It's not like we're getting brand new stuff.
Yeah, you do have, I agree with you. I'm not arguing. And it's up to local school districts to raise the money via referenda or the bond, they can bond against those. And that's how it's done. And so all we're asking is for that to be transparent and people to understand. You know, the only person who came to our bond meeting for East Allen County Schools, you're looking at him. So people aren't engaged in it. So it's not a,
I'm not at East Allen, I'm here.
I understand.
And we're different than them.
I-
I mean, we are.
I don't disagree with it. Our job's to represent my whole district.
I know.
And so I look at all, I'm very engaged and I get it.
I'm just telling you where I'm at because I can retire in 5 years. These 20 and 30-year-olds, we got to do something to keep people in this job because it's so important. And when I have really good people sitting next to me going, I don't know how long I can do this, it makes me sad for our children. That's it.
Thank you.
Hello there. I am Lindsay Coble. I am a Garrett resident and I own Audiology Always, which is a hearing care practice here in Auburn. My question is, what kind of conversations are happening around Medicare Advantage, the commercialization of Medicare? Full transparency, 70% of my practice is Medicare Advantage plans. So I take them, I try to make them work, but from healthcare, you feel the squeeze. So I guess what kind of conversations are happening around that?
I think Rep. Smaltz said something a little bit about it, but Medicare Advantage has created another profiteering class in public paying. And so our biggest issue is all of the middleman. And actually, to tie it to education a little bit, we have a huge administrative burden in healthcare, which is part of the burden that's happened in education also. But there are as many administrators at my hospital as there are physicians right now. And that's a big problem. And Medicare Advantage exacerbates that problem because they find every way not to pay for a reasonable bill that we're already paying for as a taxpayer in Medicare, right? Those are funded. So every time we add those on, it doesn't decrease our costs as a society in Medicare because they pocket the difference. And that happens in the state plans also with our MCEs and those kind of things. So I only have very limited control over Medicare Advantage, but we do have similar things in Medicaid in Indiana that we're looking at very closely. And this week, you may see an amendment on the floor tackling some of those things that I've already got planned. So I'm very hard against those. It's called value-based payments. And if we as a state save some money, it might be a reasonable thing to do. But a lot of it gets put in pockets of people that are adding nothing to healthcare.
House floor? Or
Senate floor.
Okay, just checking. I hadn't heard anything coming. I just want to
Well, I've got some things planned for the House floor too,
Okay.
but
give me a heads up.
yeah.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here this morning. My name is Amy Prosser. I do hope that all of you will return after the session is over so that we can continue to have these conversations about the bills that were passed and what they mean for our community. As we talk about SB1 and property taxes, I understand it's a very complicated issue and it isn't as simple as just cut property taxes. I understand that. However, here this morning, it's been presented as this is a revenue issue, that we just don't have enough coming in to cover everything. I don't agree with that at all. I think it's a spending issue. So I'd like to ask the three of you, what are you doing? What are you proposing on a state level to cut and to help us save money so that there are dollars that can fund our local communities and our schools? Thank you.
So I can tell you one thing, it just comes to mind immediately. Has anybody been following the vehicles that have been purchased by the Lieutenant Governor and by the Secretary of State? Anybody watching that? Any of you guys have top end Suburbans that are loaded with 12 speakers in them, leather seats? Anybody got that? I don't have that. So Mitch Gore, Representative Democrat, Indianapolis, and I wrote a bill that says you can't do that. And it's a little thing, but we're doing this little thing to say, okay, so you need the space because you're moving 8 people around, but you don't need leather seats. It doesn't matter what trim level you have. It's the same size vehicle. So we're talking about governmental platform vehicles versus one of those two is asking for an Escalade at one point. It's ridiculous. It's beyond ridiculous. So we're working just that little thing, that one little thing. We're trying to reduce costs to make sure that's not happening across the state. You got to buy the basic trim level, just like everybody else. I'd prefer it if they bought used. Talk to the state superintendent of state police, because I thought we just started talking about vehicles in a meeting and how they buy vehicles and how their vehicles get an extra warranty because they buy so many. And then I look at my communities and I've got communities that are struggling to have vehicles that don't have 150,000 brutal miles on them. So I said, what if you bought more vehicles than you needed, taking advantage of group buying, and then sell them and getting that extra warranty, and then sell them or lease them back to the local units. And we're working on that right now because I think it saves Auburn money and Butler money and Waterloo money. And we'll just ask them, you know, we want these in white, we want these in blue, we want these in brown. And that way, I think, so that's another little thing I think we can do that we can save money. I think that overall, when we look at the budget, there's a few things that got cut to save money that I'm not excited about. And I'll say one of them is the Dolly Parton Library. I think that is a program that matters. It makes a difference. I think it's going to come back, but we won't know until April 16th. So I think if you look at the budget, you'll see cuts all throughout, because I sure am hearing from all the people who are screaming about their cuts at the state level. Certainly be happy to sit down and go through some of those, but there's cuts across the board inside the budget.
One thing I'd just add real quickly, our budget writer, if you will, is Ryan Mishler, the chairman of appropriations, and he explained to us that he actually has a budget which is in the bill right now, and it has amounts, they're placeholders, if you will, a figure that is there. But he also has a budget that if the revenue forecast, which will come in on April the 15th, is higher than expected, here's where items will go back into the budget or they will be funded at a higher level. He also has another spreadsheet over here. If the expectations are lower or the projections are lower than anticipated, these numbers will be plugged in. They have to do that because there is so much uncertainty and the volatility that is accompanying this budget. Indiana has had the luxury over the last few years, because of prudent spending over that period of time, to keep things in balance. This is the first time we've really had a budget where we are so uncertain about how much money is going to be there. And that's why we keep referencing that April 15th date. That is our final budget projections before we adopt a budget. We can't leave before, we have to be out of Indianapolis by April 29th. And the only bill we have to pass is the budget. So stay tuned.
Might interrupt real fast. There is going to be a tornado drill here in 20 seconds. Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Laurel Hoff. I am an Auburn resident.
Keep going.
I thank you for allowing me to speak here today. As a tax-paying Hoosier, I'm greatly concerned with ensuring that the taxes that are collected by the state are being appropriated responsibly, as well as with reducing the tax burden, particularly for families living in poverty and who are lower middle class. I'm particularly happy to hear about the bill, House Bill 1, which would reduce property taxes. And I'm also happy to hear about the amendment that's going to be introduced next week to the public, which I understand will improve transparency for Hoosiers who pay property taxes and how much they'll owe. On the other hand, I have grave concerns, as we've discussed today, for the ways in which this bill will affect Hoosier schools, because they receive much of their funding from property taxes. When our Governor Braun, was asked how these cuts would affect our school districts, he was quoted as saying, "Almost all of them are saying they can't do without what they're having now." I would say, prove it. This is gravely concerning to me because, in my opinion, proving it would require these schools to demonstrate higher rates of teacher attrition. It would require them to demonstrate lower test scores, perhaps higher rates of high school dropout, and reduced access to disability accommodations for our vulnerable, disabled students who are Hoosiers. Our children, we owe them a quality education because they deserve it. We owe it to ourselves because they are our heritage. They are our greatest responsibility before God. My question to you is, will you protect our students from being guinea pigs used to determine whether their schools deserve funding?
Yeah. And so, I mean, we have this proposal, and I'll tell you the first thing I do is sit down for a couple hours with some of my school districts to understand exactly. So it's not about prove it or, stick it to them. That's not my MO, right? And so there's an idea out there, and then it's our job to understand what it does and how it. And so I want you to know that there's a lot of effort that goes into knowing those budgets and the effects, and so it's not a prove it kind of thing. It's understanding the exact effects and where that happens. And so I have sat down with superintendents and CFOs of school corporations and some teachers and some school board members, and have looked at their budgets the last few years in whole. And so I understand where it's at and where things are. And I think the process is more of the concern long term than it is about a budget number or the dollar amount, in my opinion.
Yeah, I echo that. I meet with my superintendents too. We talk about it. We meet at the beginning of session and talk about things that are possibly coming and talk about their concerns. And we talk throughout session about what's happening, and they let us know what they're concerned about through emails, in-person visits, text. Do the same thing with local officials. I just had a delegation from Steuben County came down and let us know what their concerns were. They met with the governor's office as well. It's very important to do that. Yeah, we're just trying to be, I didn't say prove it. I mean,
I understand that. What I want to know is if you would protect our students from an agenda that asks them to prove it.
Yeah, I don't know that agenda is going to be making it.
No, and I would agree with Rep. Smaltz. I mean, it's not our goal to, I'm not that way. I mean, I want to be purposeful in it, and our students need to be educated, right? And I'm probably the first senator in Indiana history to ask to be on the education committee for a reason. And so it's a long, difficult discussion, and trying to figure out how to help you better educate our students. That's the goal. Now, we work in Indiana under a finite amount of resources. And as you'll hear from people, and I hear from people too, is protect our tax dollars. And part of that is looking through FSSA and looking through our education and looking and making sure we're spending those dollars wisely. One of those goals is to make sure teachers get paid better and more dollars go towards educating the student. Those things, and looking hard at it, is not mutually exclusive to those things, right? And so we wouldn't spend our personal dollars the way government spends money sometimes. And so from my standpoint, taking a hard look at those things is not a problem. I think finding the solution and making sure it's laid out well to protect those dollars for students is really an important thing.
Yeah, I think we noticed maybe 6 or 8 years ago, the percentage of dollars that were coming in tuition support that were not going to the classroom was about 53%. So what we've done is we've said we want the dollars that the state is sending to schools to go to the classroom to 62%. That's the number that we're targeting. We want teachers paid. It was $40,000, now it's $45,000 coming out of school. We've said we want to have teachers in the top 20% of their class have scholarships so that they can go to school. It helps them because you're starting at $40,000 or $45,000, helps them get that education if they stay and teach here. So there's lots of efforts that we're trying. House Bill 10002, we're trying to reduce some of the regulations. If it's a may provision, then we're taking it out of code so that, a school may do it. You don't need us to say you may do it. We're not saying you can't do it, so you can do it. So I think there's a lot of thoughtful effort going into that. I don't think anybody's trying to rip the carpet out from schools or local government, but we're also trying to be true to the taxpayers and find that balance.
Thank you.
All right, one last question before we wrap up. We got a little bit started a little late, so we'll finish.
Not a question.
Okay.
Rick Ring, and I just wanted to thank the three of you for being here today, having open discussion with our public. And I think that it's been demonstrated that DeKalb County has three of the finest legislators possible in the state of Indiana. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, I want to say thank you all for attending today's town hall event. Your participation, questions, and engagement are what make these discussions meaningful and productive. Appreciate your time, your insight, and your commitment to our community. Your voices matter, and your involvement helps shape the decisions that impact us all. We look forward to continuing these conversations, working together for a better future. Thank you again. Have a great day.